So this morning we're continuing the journey. This morning we're talking about caregivers. Caregivers. Um, don't know where that falls on your list, and that's fine wherever it falls. Uh, just know that this is all we're talking about how you were specifically designed, and this might not be high on your list, but just because you're not may not, according to this assessment, um, be considered a caregiver, it doesn't mean that you don't have the heart to give care. I thought that was pretty unique when I thought of that
Good
yesterday.
job. Good job.
So thank you, appreciate that. So we still give care in our own way. There is just some people who are specifically designed and by God that they just have that heart to go probably a little bit above and beyond what others would. And that holds true for all the pathways, that there's a different way that caregivers view the care that they give. And it's just the same with any other pathway. The naturalist sees nature different than anybody else. The sensate looks at sense or sounds and incense differently than anybody else. And incense to somebody else is like, what is that strange smelling thing? But to the sensate, that's very deep and it's very sacred to them. So it just depends on how you were individually designed. So I'm, as always, just go through the who are we section. Feel free to raise your hand, jump in, ask questions. I mean, I cover everything that's in there, but I just wanted to give an overview of it, the material that we have. Caring for others is a prophetic activity. Self-centered creatures that we are, being concerned about others is an unnatural response and provides evidence of a supernatural touch by God. So that was right off the bat, that just hit me because I never thought of caring for others to be prophetic, but it is, and because the prophet is the one that represents God to the people, and so the prophet was the one that brought God's message. He or she was the evidence of God's presence, and so that's what caregiving is for the caregiver. Is that they're the ones that are providing this opportunity and they're responding to the needs of somebody, and that's providing evidence of God and his supernatural touch and his presence and his concern for people. And that's the way they minister. So it is prophetic in that sense. It is a witness to God's existence, and they do that by demonstrating care on a deeper level, probably than most of us do, but that's how they minister and that's how they do it. A parable of the Good Samaritan reminds us that attending to spiritual concerns is no excuse for refusing to get our hands dirty. So if you remember in the Good Samaritan parable, there was a Levite and a priest that passed by the man that was hurt on the side of the road because they had to get to church. The Levite, hey, I'm on program this morning. I got to get to church. I got to open up service. The priest obviously got to be there. Can't have service without the pastor. Of course, you got to be there. But in their walk in their concern to try to get to church, they walked by the person that was hurting by the side of the road. The caregiver wouldn't let that happen, and that's what the Good Samaritan represented in that parable, was the one who was willing to turn aside from those spiritual concerns and those other things to get their hands dirty and to jump in with people and to do life with them, even if it means that I have to get some of their life on me. For the caregiver, that's fine. They're willing to do that. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? That's from 1 John 3:17. How dwelleth the love? I'm such a King James type person. How dwelleth the love of God in him? And that's what we have to ask ourselves: is that if I see my brother in need, I have the material possessions. My brother is in need. Is there any compassion that I have for my brother in his need, or am I more concerned with doing the things that I have to do? And what is the scripture that says, "Be warm and filled"? I just throw a scripture, just throw a quick prayer over them and move on with my life. For the caregiver, that's just not going to happen. They have such pity and such compassion for people, and And that's how they demonstrate the love of God in them, and that's how they demonstrate the love of God to the person. So to them, it's not even a question of responding to that need. Each of you should not only look out for his own interests, but also to the interests of others, from Philippians 2 and 4. It's not it's not uh, an endorsement to be overly nosy and all up in people's business, but to have that genuine concern for other people while we're tending to our own situations, our own circumstances, our own life. And it's so easy to get caught up in our own life that we don't have that concern for others. And the Bible tells us to have an interest also to the interests of others. How is our brother doing? Have we called and reached out to our brother or our sister? How is, I love how in the leadership meeting, we took it on, Pastor asked us to check on other people, find other people in the congregation and just reach out to them and just talk to them. It's one of the things that I love about the chaplain job that I have, is that we just call people and just see how they're doing. And it surprises people so many times. I get some calls because some of them don't have my number in their phone. And so when I call, they think I'm a telemarketer at first, or a bill collector or somebody. So I get the, hello, who is this? And so I have to quickly tell them who I am and why I'm calling. And oftentimes when I tell them, I'm just calling to check on you and see how you're doing, their whole voice changes, their whole demeanor. Thank you, dear. I get my assistant over here. The whole demeanor changes in their voice. They're like, oh, well, thank you. It's like they just can't believe that someone would just call just to see how they are. You know, it's always, what do you want? But when we're looking to the interests of others, it's not about what I want from you. I'm interested in how I can be a blessing to you. Man, that was pretty profound. Somebody should have been writing that down and everything. So, you know, but that's the mentality and the attitude of the caregiver. How can I be a blessing to you? I'm just reaching out and just asking. And you'd be surprised by how many people are uplifted by that, you know, that someone cares about me. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown him as you've helped people and continue to help them. James 1:27, pure and faultless religion is looking after orphans and widows in their distress. So this pure and faultless religion is that's what we're striving for, because, you know, religion gets a bad name, and it gets a bad name because we're not pursuing pure and faultless religion. We're not doing things out of pure motive. And so it does get a bad name, and it does make people not want to come to church. And it does make people not want to be concerned with, like Prophetess Yasmin says, y'all Christians. So, you know, it does make people want to walk away from any type of organized religion, because the motives aren't there. But if we're pursuing it, the pure and faultless religion with the pure motives, the right motives, then that's a better representation of our belief system. The writers of the New Testament leave us without any doubt as the importance of loving God by loving those he made. So that's what the caregiver's heart is. That's how they show their love of God. That's how they show their connection to God, and it deepens their relationship with God, to jump into those situations. We're not jumping to them, but not be afraid to be a part of those situations and those things that are going to help people as best they can. One of the quotes from the Bible, I try to use a couple of quotes from the books, and if you don't actually have it, one of them, the author says, giving care for the caregiver, giving care isn't a chore, it's a form of worship. For the caregiver, giving care or caring for somebody, it's not a chore. It's a form of worship. So that's their view of it, is that it is a form of worship, and they have a completely different viewpoint of what caring is. This was another quote from the book. The author was talking about his friend he was in college with. His friend had advanced, I think it was multiple sclerosis or some type of neurological, that little early morning word there, neurological disorder, to where he was in a wheelchair and had to be helped around. Gordy was his name. And this was one of his observations when Gordy actually had an accident, for lack of a better word. And the author was the one that was helping him with that in that time when he had his accident. And this was one of the things that he came up with, or one of the things that he surmised from that moment. When he, talking about Gordy, he was serving me, and in some practical ways, sacrificing the privacy of his body to do it. He was talking about, in the I is himself, the author, the able-bodied one. I was so disabled inside, afraid to let people see my faults and struggles because my abilities could be hidden. Gordy's outward disability became, in a very real sense, my inward cure. His willingness to let another see his weakness revealed an inspiring inner strength. This is the viewpoint of the caregiver, and that's very powerful in that statement. How he said, I loved how he says Gordy's outward disability became his inward cure. This is the caregiver's view, that you see giving care on a whole nother level and a whole nother dimension than anybody else would. There's a sacredness to giving care. Again, very sacred, just like all the other pathways have certain things that they see as sacred, but they draw that sacredness from God himself. And same thing with the caregiver, that they see that when I'm giving care, when I'm operating in that caregiver mode, I'm operating in the love of God. I'm demonstrating the existence of the presence and the care and compassioning of God, and it's bringing with it an inner cure for me. And so very powerful with that. Let me stop right there. I feel like I've been talking for an hour. Let me stop and see if anybody has any comments or questions at this point. Nobody? Okay. Amen. So that's the overview of who caregivers are, that there's a sacredness to it, that they understand it. But of course, just like everything else, there are pitfalls to it. So some of the pitfalls are judging. Remember the lesson of Martha and Mary. Caregiving is not a license to judge others who serve God in different ways. It is true that all Christians are called to care for others, but there are different ways this obligation can be fulfilled, and it's not up to us to judge the validity of someone else's worship. So if caregiver does not fall high on your list, maybe it's down there somewhere, don't despair, don't freak out, don't wonder what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. There are whole different ways in order to give care. And just because caregiver, this particular pathway does not rank high on your list, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that God has designed you or equipped you or wired you differently. And that's fine. And that's okay. Again, don't be so legalistic about the assessment results anyway. They can be adjusted depending on the season that you're in. Maybe you've had to do caregiving in our sense for a long time. And maybe at the season in your life, you're not so much drawn to it. And that's okay. It depends on the season. It depends on a lot of circumstances. And again, it doesn't mean that you don't have the heart for others. It just means that according to that assessment, it didn't fall high on the list. Okay. It doesn't, just because you're not a caregiver doesn't mean you can't give care. I said that again. Someone's going to write that down eventually. All right. So serving others, serving ourselves through serving others. And here's what the caregivers have to be careful of, because some people with esteem problems will just serve people so they can feel better about themselves. And while that is a wonderful benefit of giving care or being a caregiver, it's a wonderful benefit, but it cannot be the primary motivation behind why you give care. Why do I help people? Just so I can feel good about myself. That's not the best and most noble reason in order to give or to be a caregiver or to give care. When caregiving becomes an act of taking, an act of deception, it is done so others will love or need them in return, and we don't want that. Now, instead of giving, it's actually become an act of taking. You've actually have distorted that the caregiving motive, and you don't want to do that. So make sure that you're giving because of a deeper sense of desire for love and service of others, and there's plenty of other motives and reasons for giving care, but you don't want it to be because I feel good about myself. I truly believe that when you do serve others and you do care for others, that's going to be a byproduct of your caregiving, that you're going to feel good about yourself. But that should not be our motive and our motivation for that. Neglecting those close to us. So, who's that? Am I missing something? Yes. Someone had their hand up?
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Just, when you were talking about serving ourselves through serving others, it also made me think about, those people that do something, and as soon as they do something, they got to tell everybody about it.
Yeah.
It's like
Absolutely.
You miss the whole purpose, or the blessing from God, because you want to put it on Facebook. You want to do this. You got to let everybody know, look what I did, and it becomes more about you and people pumping you up than it did about actually being sacrificial and being concerned about other people's needs. So I thought that was really, really good what you were sharing.
Thank you. Absolutely. That's what it's about. What about me? Getting credit for things.
Put your name on the pew.
My wife's saying, put your name on a pew, if you heard it. Yeah, people want the name on a pew, whatever, they want that recognition, or an idea comes out and it's like, okay, make sure I get the credit for that idea. So Carpenter, I see you unmuted. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was thinking about when you have someone that you're giving care to, and you're going through the process, or I call it the process. You're doing what you think is a good thing every day, but then at the same time you're complaining about having to do it for them. No sooner than you do it, if for whatever reason you don't feel like that you've been that they appropriately appreciate what you were doing, you complain about the fact that you are doing the caregiver, and how come they don't appreciate it more.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, Keith and I were watching, we watch old shows, forgive us. We were watching MASH, and some of you might not even remember what MASH is, or probably weren't born, but that's okay. Anyway, we were watching MASH, and one of the characters loaned money to another character, and you thought it was out of, okay, I saw my fellow comrade in arms needed money, so I loaned him money. But after he loaned him the money, then he tried to guilt them into doing things for him. Could you bring me a cup of coffee? Could you do this? And he was like, can't you get up and get your own coffee? So he basically gave him the money so he could guilt them into doing little things for him. And that's an example of, just having those wrong motives for why you're giving care. It's not to make yourself feel better, and it's definitely not to guilt other people into doing things for you, which we probably have met some people in our lives. We know that the reason why they do things, or they'll say, oh, don't worry about it. Don't think anything of it. No problem. But in the back of their minds, they're keeping a tally. They're keeping track of things. And somewhere down the line, they're going to ask you for something. And if you even think of trying to deny doing it, they're going to bring up, but don't you remember when I did? So yeah, we've met people like that. We don't want to be that person. We recognize that, so let's not be that. Anybody have any other comments or questions?
I also think another pitfall is possessiveness. Okay. Because you care for someone, you tend to try to do everything you can to protect them. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times when people don't listen, because we're kind of all, want to do our own thing, figure things out. But dealing with someone that is a caregiver, you tend to be too overprotective, too involved in, other people's life, because you're so worried about them, almost as if you see that they could be in danger, right? They don't see it, but you see it. So you try to do whatever you can to like prevent them from being in, you know, harm's way, which kind of can turn into like a possessiveness.
That's a good one.
You know, it can kind of be dangerous. And just for me, I have noticed, well, I don't know if you guys know, but Prophet Yolanda is my spiritual mommy. So she's dealt with me on many different levels. And one of the levels she had told me, like, your love for people will be your downfall. And I never really understood what she meant, you know, until I kind of went through a situation where I'm like looking crazy because I loved you so much. I'm over here, you know, trying to take care of you, right? Trying to be there for you, knowing that I shouldn't be over here, but because I love you so much, I want to do whatever I can to make sure you're okay. So the pitfall sometimes can too be, you know, being in areas that you have no business because you're caring for these people. And so it's just a matter of knowing boundaries. So if you're a caregiver and don't have those boundaries, you kind of in a situation, even like I'm a CNA, that's like I work with elderly, you know, disabled, things like that. And so a lot of times, because I just want to make them smile and care for them, I'm doing stuff that, again, that's not, I can get in trouble for that. Because, you know, in the workplace, you're supposed to have boundaries. But because I'm not caring about that, you just need some loving, I'm only thinking about that, you know. So I do believe, you know, a pitfall also can be not having those boundaries because you're caring for others.
Absolutely. And it's just, you know, it can get out of control just like anything else. You know, it's wonderful when it's directed correctly, but when it gets out of control, it can be destructive. And, you know, absolutely. That's a great pitfall, Marshanique. Thank you for that. Pastor, I saw your hand up. Did you have something?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. What Marshanique was saying is definitely something that I see as a potential downfall in leadership, you know, regardless of the context. When we want something more than the person that we're fighting for, you know, we end up taking on their burdens. And I think Minister Brakita also mentioned that in the comments, you know. But well, you know, another pitfall that that made me think about was the lack of balance, you know, where you care for others more than you care for yourself.
Right.
And realize that you have a limited capacity.
Right.
And you know, we think that there's some honor in allowing us to be drained and emptied without being refilled. And we fail to realize that my ability to minister and to care for you is going to be the outpour or the, you know, or the product of me caring for myself. You know, that the only way I'm going to be able to do for you effectively is if I take care of myself. And it doesn't mean that I don't value you, but I've got to make sure that my well stays full, you know, so that way when you come to draw from me, you know, you have something. And I thought that was you know, another potential pitfall that we should consider for caregivers.
Absolutely. And I think that's awesome that we're thinking of caregivers the author didn't even think of. But, you know, the author wasn't, you know, his list wasn't comprehensive and, you know, all inclusive. So I think that's awesome that we're, you know, coming up with others. And thank you for acknowledging the one who gave you that, that thought on the chat, Minister Brigida. We love her so much. Yeah, the no balance, you know, and I thought it was, you know, it's just your analogy yesterday, Pastor, was awesome about, you know, like fire. If there's no boundaries, and I think Marshanique hit on it perfectly. There's got to be boundaries. So a fire with no boundaries is out of control, and it's a wildfire burning everything up. But fire that's contained and has boundaries, it can be a campfire, and it can be very comforting and soothing and useful. And so with this, and I just think like any of the other pathways, but with caregiving, when that's out of control, then you're draining yourself, and it becomes a deception, or it becomes, the author calls it can be a disease instead of a blessing. So it's got to be, there has to be boundaries, and there definitely has to be boundaries and balance, I believe is mentioned, and definitely need that. Anybody else? One other pitfall that was not addressed, but it's in the book, is the pitfall of holding narrow definitions. And I had to read into it, like, what does he mean by that? And it kind of ties into judging, making or seeing or having our own narrow definition of what caregiving is, and then judging anybody else's worship or anybody else's attempt at caregiving that doesn't follow our narrow definition of it. But the way he defined this one was there can be in caregiving, there can be the long-term problem-solving care or the short-term problem-relieving care. The long-term problem-solving care or the short-term problem-relieving care. And the example that he used was a caregiver goes in and they provide the comfort and the care at that moment. The activist, which is kind of similar in characteristics to the caregiver, the activist is the one that is pushing for long-term problem-solving care. So they'll be the one, and he used the example of caregiving or social problems or situations. So you have a person who is hungry. The caregiver is probably the one that will go and provide the food, while the activist goes and protests to the local officials to make sure that we can change policy and change local or social or whatever needs to be changed, so that there are resources in place in order to solve the problem, of hunger. So one is short-term, the other has more of a long-term goal type orientation, and both have their place in the kingdom, and both are valid. And so we have to, the caregiver and probably all the rest of them have to be careful that there isn't this narrow definition of what it's supposed to look like. The activist and the caregiver can work together. One works for the long-term solution, the other provides the immediate relief, back and forth, but it can work together. But you have to be careful about putting them in the narrow definition and one looking down on the other, so that it kind of looks like, you know, I'm better than you, or I'm doing this, or you're not doing it right because you're not doing it my way. And so we have to be careful of that. And Ms. Kim put up on the chat, says having an imbalance can cause one to be overwhelmed, resulting in stress. And that's what Pastor was alluding to, and that's absolutely true. So you got to have balance, and we have to have boundaries, balance and boundaries with this as well as any of the other pathways. So the final section was suggestions for the road. The caregivers can be incorporated so many different ways. So we want to have not this narrow definition of it, and not just what we think it is, so that it makes us judge what everybody else doesn't do. But there's so many different things down here, and maybe you're not exactly called to go into the nursing homes and do those types of things. God bless those who do. I saw that up close and personal, and I think those that work in the healthcare and the nursing home type of industry, some of the awesome, best people in the world. But I know from previous experience that that's not exactly where I should be. But there's so many other things: repairing a house, fixing somebody, fixing a car. There's, there are other things that can be done. How can you help somebody else? Cooking. Some of you are great cooks. How about cooking something? That could be a ministry. Is just through serving, through just blessing people with food or a meal, or whatever you're good at. You're good at doing hair. Do somebody's hair. You're good at cutting. I love how barbers. I haven't seen them do it, but I remember years ago that barbers would go out and give free haircuts to the homeless. And things like that. There is a way to serve based on how you were designed. And you have to be careful about stepping out of that for any of these other reasons that we talked about. You want to stick in where God has called you to operate in. And there's so many other ways that you can show care. Even if caregiver isn't high on the list, there are still so many ways to give care. I did not, Elder Darla, did I overlook you or something? So I got a message that you were trying to say something. No?
No, sir.
Okay. Disregard then. We'll continue.
No, Apostle was saying that she hears.
Sorry, that was me.
Oh, okay.
I want to make sure she got that message about cooking for someone.
Oh, got it. Sorry, I missed that completely. Okay.
More soup.
Amen. So yeah, taking someone some soup, fixing fixing someone's car.
Yeah, first thing I heard when he said it, Apostle, was, I like soup.
There you go.
Isn't that awesome that we have an apostle who gives us a chance to express our ministry? I love that. I love that. Bring me some soup. I'm giving you a ministry opportunity. So there's a list, and I'm sure just like we thought of other pitfalls, there's other suggestions. This is not, all comprehensive. This is not all there is. There's many, many ways that we can serve. And so find the pathway that God has designed you to serve, and what can you do for other people. Watching somebody else's kids. Look, Marshanique says, yes, no, but that she said, no, she said, that ain't for me. No, I'm saying someone watch your kids. Okay, so, so yeah, she said a thumbs up for that. So, it depends. How has God designed you? And there's so many different ways that you can do it based on how you're wired. So that's just something we can look into individually. Pastor, did you wave your hand? Did you have something?
Yeah, I feel like I'm talking a lot today, but this is so good.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
You would think that caregiver would be number one on my list as much as I'm talking, but it's not. But when I look at the suggestions for the road, one of the things that was just screaming in my ear is the word listen. Mm-hmm. If we take the time to listen to people, just like Apostle, we'll hear the opportunities, we'll see. We don't have to make up anything. We don't have to try to fit people in a box. People, if we're paying attention and if we're looking for opportunities will present themselves all around us, right, as far as how we could care for those.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So so that's the material that we have for there. I'm going to turn it over to, or actually stop recording so we can talk deeper. So that's the caregivers. Next week, we're talking about enthusiasts, excited people. So join us next week and come back as we continue our Sacred Pathways journey.